Hello, NTNU. It's Nancy Giordano, and I'm recording this in Austin, Texas. I so wish I was there, being able to see your faces in person, but I'm grateful for this technology that allows us to do it this way and this opportunity to join you. And that is really the story, I think, that I'm going to share today about what I describe as the first productivity revolution, this idea that we're heading into a very, very different way of being able to connect and contribute and build together. And these become parts of the way. So we're just early days into what is possible. So let me share with you. I'm going to do this via slides, which is always a little awkward to get to at this moment, but I think it helps if you can see what it is that I am seeing as I look at what I describe again as the first productivity revolution. And the reason I use that language is because often people talk about industrial revolutions and the fact that we're heading into the fourth industrial revolution. And I actually think that that is not at all the case. I think we're taking a big leap forward. We're going into another era. And I'll talk about why I think it's a productivity revolution and why that matters and why the physics of that are so different. And it requires a different way of thinking about this. But as you imagine the future and what is possible, you talk to the technologists, the designers, and the entrepreneurs, the engineers, the scientists who are building the future. Many of them are you. And you ask how far along we are into what could be really, this new world that we're heading into. Often they will say 1%. Only 1% in. There's another futurist who will say that society will change more in the next 50 years than it has in the last 300 years. And there are many people who make those kinds of proclamations. I was having a conversation with a friend of mine who's a futurist and an author, and he described the fact that we might have 14 internet-sized revolutions that were just on our threshold waiting to dawn, as this picture shows. So the fact is, if we're standing on this edge where there's so much that's going to be changed, we have an opportunity to rethink and reimagine and rebuild and reshape almost every institution, from finance and education to food to manufacturing, right? What do we want it to look like? What is the future we want to build? And what is the story that we tell ourselves about what is possible and what we have to contribute to that? So as you start to imagine that, the question is, how do you wrap your arms around it, right? How do you begin to dive into such complexity? And the first is that I invite us all to take a deep breath. I do this with audiences around the world. It feels like sometimes we get so overwhelmed, right? We get to think about all the possibilities. We don't know how we can make sense of them. So if we just take a deep breath every once in a while, it just helps us remember that we've, we've learned a lot already, and that we probably have, the right capacities and really great networks. And what we don't have, we will continue to build and to grow so that we will be prepared as we move ahead. So deep breath. Because really here are the questions that I ask. I don't have a map anymore. I don't have a playbook. And that is scary, right? It does create anxiety for many people to think that we don't know exactly what we're building toward. If it's so new, how do we know how to navigate confidently? How do we know how to take action in a way that feels less scary? And for me, it's about having these two questions answered. Do I understand what the future needs and expects from me? And do I understand what I'm in a unique position to create and contribute to that? And that's as an individual, that's as a team, as an organization, as an institution, as an industry, as a nation, as a society. I would argue, as a world, we're thinking through these questions. You can scope it as broadly as you want. And we're also looking at it through three lenses: as individuals who are thinking about their work, right? What is it that I want to contribute on the planet? Where is it that I want to start my first job? Or what is it that I want to build? But we're also humans that are going through it. We're sons and daughters and community members. And our values and our beliefs are part of what it is that we are increasingly bringing to our work and to the world. And to the world is important because we're increasingly being asked to think about this as a member of society, which is part of what makes the future right now so extraordinary. It's about the impact that we get to have, and also the responsibility that we have, that our choices and our decisions make a very, very big difference. Which matters, again, when you think about how much is going to be reshaped as these technologies begin to emerge and converge at greater and faster speeds. So artificial intelligence, virtual reality, augmented reality, mixed reality, spatial computing, however you want to describe it, the metaverse and what's happening there, the growth of sensors and the Internet of Things, or Internet of Everything that will be ubiquitous, from a smart toothbrush to, a smart mirror to a smart refrigerator. Changes in human-machine interface, whether we'll still be looking at a phone, or whether or not we'll be, again, using our voices, or at some point whether or not we'll be using our brains, as we have a brain-computer interface. People are spending a lot of time thinking about whether or not that's the right way to interact with our environment. The rise of robotics and robotic process automation, which is things that just happen in the background. The distributed web, which is bringing us the blockchain and Bitcoin, but it's much bigger than that. And we're so early days, and what it means to completely rebuild the internet and our ability to connect to one another and not go through centralized servers. The changes in cybersecurity, the rise of drones, 3D plus printing, smart 3D printing, or additive manufacturing, certainly the growth of biotech and bioengineering, which will all be accelerated as we have greater connectivity with 5G and someday with quantum computing. What will the world look like then? And the fact is, it's happening at an exponential rate, right? Technology is advancing, information is growing, culture is shifting, not in a linear, predictable way, but in this exponential way, in which we sort of discount it or get excited about it, then we discount it, and then all of a sudden, boom, when enough data is collected, enough computing power is available, the right application, the right sort of convergence of players come together, suddenly the game shifts quite dramatically. And I think we're going to get used to this kind of big, huge, what seems out of the blue, but actually has been brewing. We just haven't been paying attention to it. The other thing that's happening at this moment, though, is that you guys are part of a really extraordinary moment in time. Time magazine literally described it as a youth quake. When you think about that, 52% of the population is under 30, and 42% of the world's population is under 25. You realize you're part of a pretty extraordinary group of people who will have new tools and a lot of new opportunity to go build what the future needs and expects. I describe you all as a generation that's empowered with a social brain that's coming of age in a year of disruption, reinvention, and huge responsibility and possibility. For the responsibility part, I think is also creating a tremendous amount of anxiety. That's what I continue to see and hear as I look at the future. And I talk to many people in college or in high school or even in elementary school in the United States. And the fact that there's this growing sense of nervousness or fear or even futility as we look at the future. The CDC is a health organization in the United States that has been doing research and shows that there's a real increase in mental health disorders around anxiety, depression, and even suicide. So I don't care how high the GDP is. I don't care how wealthy another billionaire is. If we don't arrest this issue right now and ensure that we also all feel as though there's a safe and thriving future that we get to be a part of, we have not done our job very well. So for me, this is about actually having a positive narrative of the future. If we tell ourselves scary things, we continue to fall into this place of doom. If we can tell ourselves, look for the good. Like actually, I'm not just saying tell ourselves and make up the stories. Actually, look for the positive that we can see. Many people are incentivized to tell us the sad, scary, negative story, right? Media industry, the entertainment industry, the social media industry, even incumbent businesses that are afraid of the technology that's going to come change what it is that they do. And so they try and tell us that that's scary and bad and that theirs still is the best solution. Maybe sometimes yes, maybe sometimes no. We just need to become much more discriminating around that and choose the stories that we want to hear and the stories that we feel that we can shape and we can enable the agency that we want. Mark Twain gave us this great quote years ago about you can't trust your judgment if your imagination's out of focus. And I think ours is very, very out of focus. So to help me actually years ago make sense of paradox, I created this thing called the RIF map. Very simple. But when I look at the future, what am I relieved by? What am I inspired by? What am I frustrated by? What am I frightened by? How do I use this then as a way to motivate myself to champion the things that I'm really inspired by, to create solutions for the things that I'm really frustrated by, and to blunt the things that I'm really frightened by? If there's something I'm scared of, how can I help make sure that that is not our reality? So I'm just going to walk through quickly some of the issues that you guys might be thinking about and looking at from both sides. So the idea is that there is this rise of artificial intelligence. We think it'll be as ubiquitous as electricity. I work with an artificial intelligence company now. I have for many years been involved in this industry because I really do think it's important that we know a lot more about it. It will have the ability to, again, transform every industry as we learn more about it and we challenge our assumptions and we're able to look at the data with greater tools that allow us to untangle complexity. We'll be able to figure out again how proteins unfold, which is what we've just learned in the era of medicine, but also what creates earthquakes, how to manage education, how to create personalized services. Like there's so much, right? But it does come with a fear of bias, which is very real and one that we need to get much more, again, literate and prepared for and build more diverse teams to be able to address. That's, I think, one of the key areas is to become aware of it, to look for it in the data and to think about teams that allow us to be able to see our blind spots. And also to seek out organizations like AI Global that is building a certification for safe AI, basically, along working with organizations all over the world. But right now, even on their website, they have a design assistant that allows anyone who's building an artificial intelligence app to think about 5 criteria and ensure that they're building it as safely and as robustly as they can. So if you're building anything there, I encourage you to check it out because these are the kinds of things we need to become, again, more familiar with. Certainly it's about planetary well-being. We read horrifying headlines about, plants and animals that will become more extinct if we don't arrest climate change, that we're drowning in ecological waste from plastic to e-waste, and that we've only got a certain number of years left before, we've sort of driven the planet to its edge. But I think we also then see people are waking up and taking this seriously. And whether it's municipalities that are now really committing to be 100% renewable as the price of solar and wind and other renewable energy becomes lower and more dependable. But it's also companies like Apple, H&M, IKEA, almost every large manufacturer, Zara on the planet is committing now to be carbon neutral and to have a circular supply chain that really thinks about regenerative economics, not just extractive economics. That is a very, very positive sign. And others are even advocating for the fact this isn't just about cleaning up a problem, it's a huge economic opportunity. That hitting net zero, which is the idea that we're not, we're not using more carbon than it is that we are emitting, it could actually add $1 trillion to the US economy. Imagine that on a global economic basis, what is available to us. I think it's like $7 trillion and people are estimating it could be. So it's a real incentive to actually move in that direction, right? It's the distribution of wealth. That is actually something we really do need to think about, but it's also about an accounting of it. As you see that the number of billionaires who have the same net worth as half the population on the planet continues to become more and more and more concentrated. It used to be about 380 people that had that much wealth. Now it's estimated that it was down to 26. I would argue it's even lower than that now, as we saw so much, again, wealth even more become concentrated during this past year as the tech companies continue to advance. And so that's one issue, right? We've got to make sure that we are distributing this productivity in a more fair way. And also recognize that it needs to be, that not everyone has access to it. Right now, we have a very, very skewed distribution of it. If you imagine that 52 or so, I guess, again, 52% of the population is female, and the fact that very, very few become CEOs of billion-dollar companies, or are considered on the world's richest list of people who've made self-made worth, right? And it's not because they aren't coming up with ideas, it's because they often aren't funded, they aren't given the support. There's lots of ways in which we can navigate that differently, but we're also realizing that there's this whole other thing called unpaid care work that has been invisible in our economic structures, and that is now something that is getting much more attention. Certainly during the pandemic, it became very visible, which to me is a very exciting thing. So the fact is that women's unpaid care work is estimated to be worth $10.8 trillion, almost 3 times larger than the tech industry at this moment. So if we can start to recognize the economic value of that, it gives us a lot more to work with in terms of being able to create more balance in society, which raises the questions around the future of work, right? What is work? Well, if you look at it in the traditional lens, it's energy expended to be paid by somebody else, and we are worried that robots are going to take our jobs by 2030. It will definitely take some jobs, and it definitely will require that we reskill, upskill, and really think about the future of working very differently. And there's this big reskilling revolution that is coming from the World Economic Forum, from almost every large organization, but also literally it's changing the nature of work, which I think is very exciting. And there's this movement now to create a 4-day work week. Just like the Industrial Revolution gave us weekends, we now are moving to the productivity revolution, and it will be either shorter work weeks or shorter work days, and because the nature of the work that we're doing is different, and productivity is being raised in a different way, so we don't need to do it the way we did in the industrial era. Which is why, to me, it's like when you think about the future of society, we really do need to, again, wrap our brains around the fact that we're no longer in this industrial era, we're in this productivity era. It's happening exponentially as a result of both the technologies and the ways in which we can structure things differently in a much more distributed way, in a more self-managed and self-organized way. There's so much I can go into in this and what this gap is in between. I just wrote a whole book about it if you're curious about it. And others are writing about it, not through this language, but hopefully this is the way that we will start to think about it in a way that provides more insight into why and how we need to change the way that we think. Right? When you look at the future, here are some of the headlines that are actually happening now. Right? We can make a steak, like it looks like a ribeye steak that's actually printed or grown in a lab. Right? The first cell-based ribeye steak has just been made visible, and this was a headline from last month. There's a space hotel that's opening up in 2027 on the edge of Earth's orbit that allow for a Space Jam type basketball, or just just an alternative to going on a cruise. I can go into space. I've got robots that can. We've got robots that can already do heart surgery over long distance. We've got AI that can read X-rays. We've got all kinds of ways in which, again, technology is going to revolutionize and democratize and make more accessible healthcare and diagnosis and treatment. And we'll be able to offer different ways in which we can live with dignified and safe housing, like being able to 3D print a house for significantly less than we can currently build it, with a lot less waste than we're currently doing it. So imagine, again, if we have a whole community of houses that only cost in US dollars, anywhere from $5,000 to $7,000 per house. Like that just completely radically changes the game. So as I close, I'll just say again, what does the future need and expect from you? And what are you in a unique position to create and contribute to it? This is the invitation. This is the moment that we are in. Again, we get to redesign, rethink, rebuild, reimagine every institution. And while that seems overwhelming and while it can be really daunting, I would argue it's an opportunity to build a better next, once it's safe and inclusive and thriving and includes everyone. This is the quote that guides my work. It's that playing big does not, I'm sorry, playing small does not serve the world, right? Our actions, our curiosities, our where it is we put our time, attention, and energy really do make a difference. So this is not the time for fear. If we imagine this productivity revolution that we all get to usher in, it's a time to play really big. Thank you. Good luck with the rest of your event.